Hi, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Marissa Kozlov, Vice President at Insider Intelligence. Welcome to today's Tech Talk webinar, where we host guest speakers from all areas of media, ad tech, and MarTech. Today, I'm joined by InMobi's Robyn Meyers, Vice President of West Coast Brand Partnerships, coming to us today from Los Angeles. Hi, Robyn.
Hi, Marissa. Good to see you.
We also have Sergio Serra, Group Product Manager on the supply side platform side, coming to us from also Los Angeles. Hey, Sergio.
Hi, Marissa. Good talking to you.
And we also have Advertiser Perceptions, Lauren Fisher, Executive Vice President of Business Intelligence in Connecticut today. Lauren, nice to see you.
Hey, Marissa, great to be here.
Well, we are thrilled to have all of you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Robyn, Sergio, and Lauren will highlight how advertisers are currently thinking about IDFA and the best path forward. So before we get started, I will share just a few housekeeping items with you. You'll receive a link to view today's recording and slides. And if your colleagues want to join us, have them go to our simulcast on either LinkedIn Live or Twitter. And finally, don't forget to submit questions for our presenters to answer live during the second half of today's webinar. We'll do our best to get to as many as we can, so please keep those questions coming. Robyn, over to you.
Terrific. Thanks, Marissa. We're really excited to be here today. We'll be talking a little bit more about the ATT framework, some myths, some facts about what's happening. Then we'll go into some of the advertiser insights, what brands are thinking and feeling during this time. And then from there, we'll talk a little bit more about what advertisers need to do, some solutions, recommendations that we've been giving some of our clients at InMobi. And then we would love to take your questions after that. So with that, we will dive right in. I'll hand it over to you, Sergio.
Sure. Thanks, Robyn. I think we should start about talking how IDFA is used by advertisers today. But even doing so, I just wanted to clarify and give a quick premise on what IDFA is. So IDFA stands for Identifier for Advertisers and was launched by Apple in 2012 along with iOS 6. And the reason why Apple came up with this idea is simply because before that, advertising used to revolve around the concept of UDID, which is a permanent ID. So of course, it was raising multiple concerns from a privacy standpoint. And consequently, they roll out this new ID that can be reset by the user. Now, the counterpart of IDFA for the other biggest platform, mobile platform, which is Google Advertiser ID or Google Advertising ID, also known as Android Advertising ID. With this context in mind, let's try to understand how both of these IDs are used today by the advertisers. So first of all, advertisers use IDFA for targeting or identity. And the way this works is, the data science team at any advertiser company will try to put together a list of device IDs that have some commonalities. So for instance, if you are seen multiple times, let's say to a stadium, then you are supposed to be a sport enthusiast. Or maybe you tend to serve the news on a daily basis and potentially on finance, then you are a finance enthusiast. So there could be multiple data points that create a user segment or cohort. But again, it's important to keep in mind that a user segment is really a list of device IDs in which the device IDs contained there have something in common. The second reason why IDFA is used today is for efficiency. Now, what I mean by efficiency is really all basic features that must be guaranteed by the DSP in this case. So, for instance, frequency capping or ad rotation, as well as dynamic creative, and finally anti-fraud. Now, when it comes to anti-fraud, most of the IVT providers, IVT vendors, rely on IDFA to detect hijacked devices, for instance. And when it comes to frequency capping, on the other hand, this is very important because if you are a brand like Adidas, for instance, and you are just releasing and launching a new pair of shoes, the last thing you really want is to present your ad, 10 times within 60 seconds to your users, because it's a lose-lose situation, right? So you waste budget and the user fatigue increases. And when it comes to dynamic creatives, basically the IDFA allows the advertiser to employ different creatives component depending upon the user. So for instance, I might know that Robyn is more willing to click on an ad if there is a pulsating CTA, and maybe Lauren just prefers a green CTA button, right? So this is really based on IDFA and on my knowledge of these specific people. Lastly, measurement and attribution is also very important because for any marketing campaign, you definitely want, as an advertiser, as a marketer, to measure the impact of your investment. And this not only holds true for performance campaigns and performance buyers looking at app download, but also for brands that we want to have some tangible results when it comes to brand lift, brand awareness campaigns, footfall attributions, and in-store location reports, right? So with this context in mind, I think we can move into the next slide, Robyn, and try to really understand what's going to happen, and actually what started to happen happening from the past week. So Apple introduced a new framework called ATT. ATT stands for App Tracking Transparency, and as I said, is a framework that allows the publisher to present a prompt to the user in which the publisher is supposed to ask for authorization when it comes to tracking the user across apps from an advertising perspective. Now, this new framework was presented by Apple back in 2020, June 2020, which is the date when the last WWDC by Apple was taken. And finally, it was introduced with iOS 14 and enforced by Apple with 14.5, which is the last version available that was released really last week. So we have 8-day data so far. So when it comes to the ramifications that ATT will come with, well, the easy consequence right now is that, of course, the opt-in rate will drop, because up until iOS 13, the user could definitely opt out from advertising, but it was supposed to proactively go on settings and just disable tracking. But with iOS 14 and the introduction of ATT, now the publisher must present upfront the prompt to the user asking for authorization. Otherwise, the user is deemed not to allow tracking to the publisher. And consequently, the device ID is really zeroed. So there is no more IDFA in that case. So whenever an IDFA is not present anymore, then going back to the points that we just discussed, first of all, targeting is gonna no longer be possible, because as we said, the cohorts are really lists of device IDs. So whenever the device ID is not there, then you definitely cannot employ targeting anymore. And by the way, this also holds true for alternative IDs technologies that are coming to life very prominently in the ecosystem, all the way from LiveRamp, ID5, BrightRoll, and any other alternative ID, as well as fingerprinting. So Apple clearly said that whenever this ID or fingerprinting key is trying to target a specific user, then you must have the consent from the user. So this is going to be definitely a challenge. Now, on the other hand, when it comes to measurement and attribution, there are two things to keep in mind. So one side of the equation is on app performance or app download campaigns. For this, let's say that Apple did help the advertisers by introducing in 2018 a framework called SKAd Network. We will dig a little bit more into this framework later today in this session. And the real problem, though, is gonna be on brand, right? So you definitely want, as I was saying previously, to measure the impact of your activities. So for this, right now there is not a robust solution beyond, of course, trying to still target IDFA, so opt-in supply. Now, coming to the good news, though, there are definitely good news. So KPIs and upstream KPIs are definitely not going to be impacted. So when you look at your VCRs, CTRs, or viewability metrics, they are really not reliant on IDFA as such. So I would highly recommend looking at those metrics and try to optimize starting from there. And finally, another important key is the contextual targeting. So in my mind, it is going to be of massive importance in the next couple of days, weeks, and months. And by contextual, I not only mean app category or even the bundle, the bare bundle targeting, but I actually mean the employment of AI technologies in order to look at additional contextual data points, such as operating system, device, hardware version, or even geolocation itself. So with this context in mind, I will hand it over to Lauren from Advertiser Perceptions, and really keen to hear about your findings.
Thanks, Sergio. That was a really helpful overview, and you touched on a lot of the things that I'm going to take you through in terms of where advertisers are, both with their levels of preparedness for the impact of this update, as well as how they're planning to modify both their targeting and measurement strategies. So, starting at the top, just talking generally about overall awareness of this update. What you're seeing here comes from our December 2020 US mobile advertising study. And in this study, we polled US mobile advertisers to understand how familiar they were with the details of this update. At the time, you can see that nearly 90% had some level of familiarity, but really we're talking about half who either said they were either very or somewhat familiar with this update and the impending changes. Now, when we fast forward to last week, we just got out of field with a new study on this topic. And we see that overall awareness is sky high. Largely every US advertiser at this point is either generally or somewhat familiar with these changes. And then moving on to the next slide, talking a little bit about how they're preparing. In December, you had about 2 in 5 who were starting to formulate alternative strategies for targeting and measurement. Now, that's a pretty low number if you consider the fact that originally this update was supposed to roll out in the fall. So advertisers have had time to prepare. Again, if we look at more recent data, we do see that advertisers are still limited in their preparations. About a similar portion in our latest study who are relying on IDFA said they have already altered their targeting and measurement strategies to anticipate these impacts. But, it's important to point out a couple pieces of information for context here. First and foremost, these types of numbers aren't that uncommon when we are talking about big changes in the industry that go into effect. Just thinking back to regulatory changes like GDPR and CCPA, for example, there were a significant portion of advertisers who right at the deadlines were still working things out. They were still trying to figure out what their strategy was, and this is no exception. Our research also suggests that it is possible some advertisers aren't entirely aware of how much this is going to impact their business. Some research that we've done suggests that somewhere between about a third to half of US advertisers say that they're using IDFA, but that also, when we also look at our research, it does suggest that these are the advertisers who are answering that question who have full authority over their measurement capabilities. We know that there's many more advertisers who are using mobile measurement partners. They're relying on the social platforms. They're even using their agencies for measurement. So we can expect that there's probably even a greater portion of advertisers that are going to be impacted by these changes. And now that these changes are here, it will be really interesting to see how quickly some of these numbers come up for the portion of advertisers who are preparing and are ready to address things head on. So shifting gears a little bit, talking more in depth about where advertisers are moving. Robyn, I'm going to have you move to the next slide to talk a little bit about budgeting and pricing. So here again, you're looking at a data point from our December 2020 study. And you can see a good portion of mobile advertisers did say that they would be planning to reallocate funds to other platforms with more lenient privacy policies. What this really means is other platforms where they have the ability to continue to execute one-to-one targeting. And this is not unlike a similar move that we saw in the advertising community back in 2018 when Apple rolled out its Intelligent Tracking Prevention 2.0 update. At that time, ITP 2.0 was about deprecating the use of the third-party cookie in the Safari browser. And we saw similar moves on the part of advertisers, shifting those dollars out of Safari into other browsers, into mobile app. And so we expect this will be the case for this particular update as well, with advertisers, again, continuing to move money to where they're going to continue to be able to target in the near term. Now, like the ITP 2.0 update over time, we expect that this will sort of stabilize And that is the expectation here as advertisers find alternate strategies and really get their bearings about them. As you can imagine from a pricing perspective, for those who are still bidding on in-app inventory in iOS, the inventory that does have the IDFA, that's going to come at a premium value. So I think we should expect to see that as well from a pricing perspective.
Yeah, I'll just jump in here, Lauren. From InMobi's perspective as well, from a budget perspective, seeing of course, Android inventory becoming increasingly more valuable. We're even recommending some short-term shifts into CTV as well. So I think in the short term, these are some recommendations that we have as amongst other players in the industry, and we'll probably continue to see that for a little bit longer.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then moving on, talking about some of the strategies that advertisers are taking. So how are they making modifications? Those 2 in 5 who say that they're addressing these changes on the targeting and measurement front, what are they doing? First and foremost, they are investing and prioritizing first-party data. This is something that we've seen really gain prominence over the past couple of years, even without privacy concerns, with customer experience types initiatives, just wanting to get closer to the customer. We do anticipate that advertisers are going to continue to really boost what they can do with first-party data and get consumers to really want to share that information in exchange for value. Important to note is that this isn't just about advertisers' first-party data. They will be looking to other partners, whether that's their publishers, their app developers, even some of the platforms who have possession of that first-party data as well. That's really going to be the key to scaling some of these initiatives. Contextual targeting, Sergio, you talked about this a little bit. This is a big one too. I love that you raised the point that it's not just about finding context in terms of keyword. It's very much also about advanced contextual targeting, relying on machine learning to really understand and help with some of that targeting. And this is what we hear from advertisers. They want publishers to really bring to the table innovative solutions, immersive experiences, so that they can continue to build a great experience with the advertiser and continue to drive performance. Robyn, I think you're going to talk about creative as well. When you're pairing the creative aspect of this with the contextual, this is really where that 1-2 punch comes into play, and the value continues to live for mobile advertisers. And then on the SCAD network front, we have seen adoption here. It's not, still advertisers are trying to figure it out. Roughly a quarter of advertisers in the US said that they either have already or are in the process of using Apple's SCAD network for attribution. So again, still a lot of work to be done on this front, but by and large, advertisers are aware of these changes, they're familiar with them, and they are taking some form of action. Now, Sergio, I know that you've been tracking this really closely. Obviously, we're less than a week or a little over a week into all of this, but looking at adoption metrics, how are things looking on the supply side?
Yeah, absolutely, and you're absolutely right, and I'm definitely looking at this very often these days. So I do have good news because the opt-in rate we are seeing as of this morning is north of 16%. Now, our initial forecast was around 25 to 30%, and I believe this is absolutely still on track. Reason being that not all the publishers, based on our research and reach out, did introduce the ATT prompt yet. And this is mostly because they are understandably afraid of losing that opportunity. So once you present the prompt for the first time, if the user opts out, then the odds for the user to go back on his settings and then re-enable tracking for that app is going to be very, very low. So I think the premium publishers are leading the way, and torso publishers and the majority of the other publishers are just taking a back seat and looking at the best practices. Indeed, if you saw the prompt from Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, like yesterday or the day before, I do think they are fascinating. So, optimization on that extent is still needed. And when it comes to SKA network penetration from the supply side, so publishers that they've taken our latest SDK and that support SKA network attribution, we are really talking about 75%, which is fairly massive. And I do see this hitting the 90% mark within the next 1 or 2 months.
Let's talk a little bit more about how we're looking at some solutions for our brand advertisers. At InMobi, we've been really closely partnering with the brands that run ads in our apps on our platform. And what we're really focused on is making sure that they're aware of these sort of short-term recommendations, and that all DSPs have very different levels of awareness and capabilities post iOS 14.5. So kind of given that context, we really are focused on the KPI, right? So anytime a brand has a KPI, let's say of CTR, VCR, viewability, very sort of upper funnel brand metrics, there's really no impact. We can still optimize to those KPIs regardless of whether or not we're getting the IDFA signals or not. That tends to change though once we kind of go through the funnel, and let's say a brand has a brand lift study KPI, right? They're working with partners like Millward Brown. They're looking at brand health metrics. How's their brand favorability or purchase intent being impacted by their media campaigns? For now, in the short term, we are recommending more budget being shifted to Android inventory solely for the purposes of meeting those study thresholds on those measured impressions. So we want to make sure they're reaching significance and they can still run those studies. Similarly, if we're running a footfall or store visitation study, with partners like Placed or Cubics or InMarket, we want to make sure that we're reaching that significance. So shifting a bit more to the Android side for now has been shown to be successful. And then, of course, on the sales study side, where we're running, multi-touch attribution with partners like Nielsen or IRI, for example, where they will need, those identifiers will do a bit more on the Android side. So that's kind of a slight impact on those types of KPIs. However, when we get to the reach and frequency side, if it's a kind of a more traditional brand advertiser that does tend to run a lot of TV or radio, for example, we are looking to move the entire budget to Android and iOS opt-in only. Those are the only ways that the advertiser or the DSP will have the control that they need to really control the reach and frequency on our side. And then finally, lastly, we talk a little bit more about app installs and kind of the very lower of the funnel, like remarketing types of campaigns where brands are really looking to acquire new users. If that is your KPI, we highly recommend that scan integration on both the DSP side of choice or InMobi, making sure that the publishers that you're running on are integrated, and all of that good stuff, and your MMP is also well integrated. So that's really what we're recommending in the short term, and we do expect that these recommendations will evolve and change as time goes on and more users are opted in. But for now, this is really kind of how we're consulting our brands and partners. Yeah, and Sergio, I'd love to hear a little bit more from you. What you're seeing on the performance advertiser side.
Right, so that's a great question, and I think it's also a great hook to talk about SKR Network, as I hinted before. So just to summarize, SKR Network is an attribution framework that was launched by Apple in 2018, actually. Like, very few people noticed that this was launched along with iOS 11.5. Now, the reason why it was never adopted at a scale is because the IDFA frequency in the ad request was, of course, very high. So nobody really wanted to move from a device ID level attribution model to an aggregate level, which is really what SKR Network allows you to do. But with the enforcement of ATT, then of course, SKR Network becomes the only solution, right? In case of opt-out supply. So SKR Network provides you with a way actually to still measure CPA and ROAS when it comes to app download. Again, this is not applicable, at least yet, to brand because it's really specific to app download. Basically, the postback you get from SKR Network is really gonna give a very high level view into your optimization, because the best you're gonna get is basically the campaign ID and the source app. Source app being the app that drove the conversion in which you run your marketing campaign. What I do foresee, though, is that marketers at any point in time will have at least two campaigns, two different strategies. So one will be still with the opted-in supply, in which the previous status quo will keep exist. Meaning that you will have your MMP, passing you data at the device ID level, and you will be able to optimize towards that. Now, on the other side, when there is opted out supply, since you can't even use fingerprinting because Apple clearly called this out in their FAQ on the website, you will need to really rely on a SCARE network, and still you can work with your MMP, of course, but the data that both Apple and your MMP will be able to provide is really aggregate data. So what I do foresee is, the main opted-in supply strategies drive the opted out strategy. So what this means is, if you know that a specific campaign on the opted-in supply is performing very well in terms of downstream KPIs across a specific segment of users, which is contextual in that case, then you should be able to replicate that into your opted out supply. So I think it's very safe to say that eCPMs on opted-in supply will dramatically go up, even higher than the current level of limited tracking supply we see today. Just a quick note, limited tracking is just the definition of opted out supply that we used to have by Apple until iOS 13. So now the frequency of opted out supply is going to go up, and the frequency of opted in supply is going to go down. So it's just economics, right? The CPMs will go up on that bucket. And I think Lauren did mention this, but I would really like to stress this prediction. And Lauren, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. It comes down to economics. If the supply goes down in terms of the number of impressions that carry IDFA, then the value is going to go up. So it'll be interesting to see how high it climbs.
Exactly. So we are already seeing, eCPMs across bucket on the opted-in supply grow by, 45% compared to opted-out supply. And just to close on this slide, Robyn, I think I will reinforce the point that upstream metrics are going to stay. So I would really encourage everybody looking at, CTRs, VCRs, viewability, because they will help a ton, driving the final conversion as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Sergio. I think sort of on the brand advertising side, what we're seeing is there's a ton of work being done, I think, to really become experts in this more curated contextual targeting space and understanding, how brands who are looking to reach certain types of users, when they're not getting these signals, how do we do that, right? So what our team has done is really started to heavily curate a lot of sort of app store categories by, bundle ID, for example. So if you're a brand that's looking to reach, for example, fitness enthusiasts, right? You've launched a new fitness platform. You want to reach people that are like listening to music and they're into fitness. How do we do that, right? So we are really looking at, the App Store category of fitness apps, lifestyle apps, music apps, and then we're bundling them into a PMP setting where the advertiser can just know that they'll be in that type of environment. That is different, I would say, from TV and radio, where contextual targeting is a bit different in terms of the context in which the ad is being served. So it's really mainly around the type of content on an app that we're going to be serving that ad. I think we've done a lot of great work in terms of the KPI-based advertising, like I mentioned. I think a lot of brands, in the creative space have been really optimizing towards their KPIs, whether it be engagement rate or click-through rate. That's really showing intent of the user. And you don't need, a ton of data for this. You just need some really good creative. So what we've been doing at InMobi is working with our brands to make sure that not only are they curating their ads to show in apps that make sense from a contextual perspective, but also using creative, knowing that they're reaching people in, let's say, MyFitnessPal, for example. So, making sure that we're able to A/B test different creative in these types of environments and really optimize based on the user's response has been incredibly successful so far. And obviously we only have, a week of data, but we've been seeing some encouraging results, I would say, from both, the contextual and the creative lens. Sergio, I'm going to toss it back to you. I would love to hear your some of your predictions about what the future holds for everyone.
Absolutely. And I think, what we have been saying and what you specifically, highlighted during this conversation is, as you said, really specific, really meant to be a stopgap solution in terms of shifting, budgets away from iOS and moving into Android, which is absolutely fine in the short term again. But when it comes to looking at the larger scheme of things and the long term, then I think buyers can't really discount, can't really write off iOS supply, right? So iOS by antonomasia is the leads to the highest ROAS for buyers. So it's really impossible, to disqualify that supply from your acquisition strategies. In addition, I do believe that Google and the other platforms, but for as far as we are concerned on in-app, really Google will follow suit very soon. In fact, they actually came out with a very strong stance saying that they are aiming by 2022 to sunset third-party cookies on their browser, which is Chrome. Now, this is, as I said, a very strong signal to the ecosystem, and it's the exact same step that Apple took with ITP in 2017, as Lauren mentioned before. So I do think that this is going to happen soon for Google Advertising ID as well. I, of course, don't know when, but it's going to happen. And with this context in mind, I would say the sooner you try to embrace the change, the easier and the smoother this new world is gonna be for you as an advertiser. With that, I will hand it over to Marisa, hoping we got some interesting questions.
Well, thank you all so much, Robyn, Sergio, Lauren. What a great presentation today. It was great to hear your perspective on where things are right now, where things are headed in the future. And Lauren, really interesting to hear more on that study that you all conducted as well. So thank you so much for sharing all of those great insights with us. And Sergio, you're right, questions are coming in. So let's get started with that immediately. The first one comes to us today from Nina in Chicago, who asks, how are app publishers reacting to these changes? Lauren, what's your thought? What are your thoughts on that?
Sure, I'm happy to take that one. So what we're largely seeing is that they are reacting to these changes. Compared with the buy side, a little bit more. I think just in general, there's a little bit more urgency for the publishers to figure this out for their monetization strategies. We know from recent research that at least half say they're already engaging and working with Apple. A significant portion are taking steps that you're seeing the advertising or the buy side take as well. They're really looking at their own first party data, their audiences. They're very much looking at contextual targeting. They see that as a massive opportunity. They're looking at machine learning and algorithms to help them with some of that contextual targeting and other targeting capabilities. And on the measurement front, we know that there's a lot of experimentation. They're listening closely to advertisers about what they want and what they need. They're trying to anticipate some of the measurement methodology shifts. And they know that they need to, be able to plug into that and offer those capabilities.
All right, thank you for that perspective. Alina in New York asks, are these changes retroactive? Meaning, are we able to target audiences that were built out prior to the rollout of ATT? Sergio, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And yes, the changes are retroactive in that from iOS 14.5, if the user that you identified previously decided not to opt in, then the identifier will no longer be there. And since, as we say, the cohorts are really list of device IDs, unfortunately, this will no longer work. Now, the good news is that this might vary upon the app, because unless the user decided to opt out from tracking holistically, so across the board, which is kind of rare, then maybe she or him will basically decide to opt into different bundles as opposed to another one. So yeah, the frequency of IDFA is gonna go down, but potentially the segments can be used as long as the user opted in.
Okay, thank you for that. Stephen in Montreal asks, how are brands thinking about universal identity solutions in a post-IDFA environment? Robyn, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the positives of all of these changes has been around the industry really rallying together, finding common ground. A lot of companies like InMobi joining consortiums in which we can support some more universal types of solutions. there are a few companies out there that are doing a lot in this space. I think, for example, LiveRamp and their IDL solution, and The Trade Desk, and lots of DSPs and partners are really starting to roll out more universally accepted identifiers. I know at InMobi specifically, we've launched our own unified and amplified platforms to make sure that we can support a lot of these different identifiers, and taking household IP and bringing that in to really to hone in on these users that are so valuable. So I think that there's a ton being done in this space. I think that this is a space that will be closely watched in the coming months, especially to make sure that brands can still target users as more and more companies join these types of partnerships.
Okay.
Yeah, and just to piggy.
Yeah,
I wanted to piggyback on that because this is something that we're watching closely as well. And, interest is high on the advertiser and on the publisher front. We see them willing to work with multiple partners. I think it's important to emphasize that, they are willing to test any and every solution that might make sense for them. So, Robyn, to your point, this is going to be a very active and interactive space over the next 12 to 24 months.
Thank you. Great perspectives from both of you on what brands are thinking. John in Greenbow, North Carolina, says for retargeting, you must have an opt-in. I thought you were also able to retarget anyone that visits your site without an opt-in. Yes or no? Sergio, can you clarify more on the in-app changes specifically?
Yeah, so again, if the IDFA is not going to be there, unfortunately, you can't even do retargeting because you don't know whether you are retargeting that specific user or someone else. And additionally, if you are planning to use any alternative ID, or like, for instance, hashed email ID from, again, LiveRamp, ID5, any other alternative ID, as well as fingerprinting, you still need to get the consent from the user, so they opt in. So unless you get the opt-in, there is this also applies to retargeting. Yes.
Okay, thanks. Sergio, another question for you coming from Mike in Queens. When will Android implement something similar or depreciate the Google advertising ID?
Yeah, so that's the $1 million question. And as I was trying to explain in the last slide, of course, Google did give a strong signal to the ecosystem, saying that they will deprecate third-party cookies from Chrome in 2022 or by 2022. So I really, I think, none of us has the crystal ball to say, yes, this is going to happen in this specific day or year, but I do think this is going to be quicker than what they are planning to do with Chrome. So as soon as third-party cookies are deprecated, they will work on deprecating Google Advertising ID. Reason being that they have already come up with multiple approaches like the Privacy Sandbox, Flux. So these are again strong signs of that intention.
Okay, thank you. Cindy in San Diego asks, what are the different DSPs doing to prepare for these changes? Sergio, I'll ask that one to you as well.
Sure. That's a very interesting question, and we are seeing different situations, so to say. So some DSPs, irrespective of the size, are preparing very well to this apocalypse, right? To this IDFA apocalypse, by instrumenting methodologies for allowing frequency capping or for allowing attribution with scan. But unfortunately, some other ones, and again, irrespective of the size, which is concerning, are not really building this mechanism yet. So as a advice, I will tell everybody, you should table this conversation with your DSP, trying to understand what they are doing. And hey, if they are not even able to frequency cap, maybe you should try to, at the very least, push towards that. On that note, for instance, the IDFA is the identifier for publishers that is common across all the apps of that specific publisher. And I do believe this can be used for negative targeting, so meaning for frequency capping. Again, it cannot be used for targeting, but as long as you are using it not to target the user and not to bombard it, I think it's fine. So yeah.
We are going to take one more question today. That comes from Rosetta in Charlotte, North Carolina. Are advertisers allowed to offer an incentive for an opt-in? Sergio, what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so that's a very gray area. Although Apple did say that incentives are originally say that incentives are not allowed, then recently we saw an update on the FAQ, putting some mock of an example of the prompt, ATT prompt, trying to tell the user, hey, you can get something back if you opt in, right? So I think as long as you don't prevent the user from using the app, right? So if you say, hey, either you allow me to track you or you cannot use the app, then of course it's a no-go. But as long as you try to highlight the value and what the user can get back from that, then I think it's perfectly fine.
Okay, great perspective on incentivizing. And thank you so much to all three of you, Robyn, Sergio, and Lauren. This was fantastic today. We certainly appreciate the great presentation, the insights, and of course for answering all of those questions from our audience today. And thanks to our audience, fantastic questions. So we appreciate you participating with us. Before we wrap up today, let me just take a moment to tell you what's happening across eMarketer's media channels. You can register for upcoming live analyst and tech talk webinars at eMarketer.com/webinars. On the audio side, don't forget to tune into our podcast, Behind the Numbers. And lastly, please check out all of our newsletters. Keep an eye on your email for the link to today's recording and slides. And of course, feel free to share that with your colleagues. Thank you all for your time. Thanks again to Robyn, Sergio, Lauren, and the entire team at InMobi. We'll see you all for the next Tech Talk. But until then, please be safe, wear a mask, and take care of each other.